I'm here to educate you about some of the misconceptions associated with sex offender housing restriction laws. Residency restriction laws decide how close registered and paroled sex offenders can live or visit community safe zones. These safe zones vary by distance and may include schools, parks, daycare centers, and other places commonly visited by children. The main purpose of such policies is to decrease the risk posed to children by repeat sexual predators by decreasing their access and opportunity. The first widely held misconception is that sex offender housing restriction laws allow for the reintegration of offenders back into society after they serve their prison sentence. However, in the state of Florida, there are 71 registered sex offenders currently living under the Julia Tuttle Causeway, a major highway. This is because sex offender housing restriction laws prevent them from locating compliant housing and living anywhere else in the Miami-Dade County. In fact, the permanent address on the sex offender's license is the Julia Tuttle Causeway. Additionally, they are required to stay under the bridge from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. every night. So, the reality of this situation is that sex offender housing restriction laws lead to registered sex offenders being ostracized from society and unemployed as a result of their felony record and stigmatizing status. It prevents offenders from residing with supportive family members who live in restricted areas. Ultimately, they are forced to live as homeless people without proper sanitation even after they serve their prison sentence, therefore hindering reintegration. The public also holds the misconception that these housing restrictions are necessary to protect children from dangerous sex offenders. They believe that sex offenders are only banned from living near schools and parks, areas that are mainly populated by young children. But this is not the case. In Florida specifically, Miami-Dade County has residency restrictions that bar sex offenders from living within 2,500 feet of schools. Florida state laws also bar sex offenders from living within 1,000 feet from all schools, parks, or playgrounds. And for offenders on parole, 1,000 feet from school bus stops. The harsh reality is that these housing restrictions go beyond the close proximity of schools and are actually extremely strict. In fact, housing availability is so limited by geographic restrictions and further aggravated by affordability of housing. When removing no-go or housing restriction zones, the only places left for sex offenders to live are in million-dollar developments, industrial parks, and under the Julia Tuttle Causeway. Another public misconception about sex offender housing restrictions is that different cities in Miami-Dade County have different laws that may be more lenient than the county ordinance. But the number of affordable housing units within the entire county is actually close to little or none. In fact, an American Civil Liberties Union study found only 15 housing units that were available to sex offenders at a rate of $1,000 or less a month, and none were available for less than $750 a month. Because of the lack of affordable housing in the area, the ACLU has initiated a lawsuit concerning the 1,000 feet law in Miami-Dade County. There are a total of 24 cities that have their own residency restrictions. As you can see, these restrictions are in addition to the county and statewide ordinances. They only increase the severity and impact of these laws on paroled offenders. And finally, many are under the false impression that sex offender laws are created by unbiased experts whose only goal is to decrease sex offender reoffenses. Let me tell you about Ron Book, a Florida lobbyist. He is the real architect of Florida's laws, and his housing restriction laws are motivated by his daughter's sexual assault. She was abused by their nanny, who was eventually sent to prison. Ron Book is also the one in charge of finding proper housing for registered sex offenders. He admits that his work positions are in conflict with each other. As seen by Florida's lobbyist Ron Book, legislation can be created by lobbyists rather than policy experts. These lobbyists often have personal biases that heavily influence their attitudes in legislation regarding sex offenders. They aim to see all sex offenders punished even after they have served their prison sentences. So the assumption that these housing restriction laws are created by unbiased experts are indeed false. And that concludes all the information I have for you on the misconceptions of sex offender housing restrictions.